Hey, tonight we're looking up, but not for stars or sunsets. We're talking about the nights when the sky itself turned hostile. When strange lights danced above cities, fire rained from the heavens, and the clouds opened up in ways no one could explain. These aren't just old legends. Some of these events are recorded in history books, backed by eyewitnesses, and still have scientists scratching their heads. From blood-red moons to skyquakes and mysterious flashes, the sky has a way of reminding us how small and powerless we really are. If you're into this kind of late-night journey through the strange and unsettling, drop a like or hit subscribe. It really helps keep this going. And hey, I always love knowing where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Let's build this little global campfire together. Now dim the lights, maybe crack a window if you're feeling brave, and let's stare into the unknown together, because tonight we're exploring every time the sky did something truly terrifying. On the morning of June 30, 1908, the sky above central Siberia lit up with a fire that shouldn't have been there. It was just after 7 a.m., near the Podkamenaya Tunguska River, remote, forested, the kind of place where nothing happens except trees growing and bugs buzzing. Then the sky roared. Witnesses described a streak of fire tearing across the heavens, followed by an explosion so loud it shattered windows 35 miles away. Herds of reindeer were flung into the air like rag dolls. People felt the heat blast from miles off. In a matter of seconds, over 800 square miles of forest, more than the size of New York City, were flattened. Trees didn't just fall. They were laid down like matchsticks, all pointing away from a mysterious central point. And yet, when scientists finally arrived weeks later, because again, Siberia, they found no crater, no rock, no clear source for this world-ending level tantrum from the sky. So what was it? To this day, the Tunguska event remains one of Earth's greatest unsolved sky punch mysteries. The leading theory is that a meteoroid, somewhere between 160 to 200 feet wide, entered Earth's atmosphere at over 30 miles per hour, exploded mid-air, and released energy equivalent to 10 to 15 megatons of TNT. For reference, that's about 10 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. All of it, boom, right above a sleepy forest. The fact that there was no impact crater actually supports the theory. Instead of hitting the ground, the object exploded in what's known as an airburst, essentially detonating in the atmosphere before it could reach Earth. Think of it like a space rock doing a cannonball into our atmosphere and belly flopping in the most dramatic way possible. But just because that's the best theory doesn't mean people haven't tried to get weird with it. And weird, we did. Some thought it was an alien spaceship, either crash landing or sacrificing itself to save Earth from a more catastrophic collision. That one actually has its own dedicated sci-fi fan base, complete with stories about extraterrestrial pilots steering their doomed ship into a selfless nosedive for humanity. It's kind of sweet. Also, completely unproven. Others floated the idea that it was a miniature black hole passing through the Eartha cosmic pinprick that zipped in, wrecked everything, and left without even a goodbye. Scientists largely reject that theory for being a little too dramatic, even for space. There's also a fringe group that believes it was the result of Nikola Tesla's death ray. Supposedly, Tesla had been experimenting with transmitting massive amounts of electrical energy wirelessly and aimed it toward the Arctic. If true, and spoiler, it's probably note it would have made for the worst science fair project ever. Whatever it was, the aftershocks of the event reached far beyond Russia. For days after the explosion, skies across Europe and Asia glowed strangely. In London, people reported being able to read newspapers at midnight without any artificial light, The sunsets turned electric pink, and the atmosphere, still jittery from the blast, scattered sunlight in surreal ways. Some mistook it for the end of the world. Others just thought it was the best lighting they'd ever had for evening tea. What's especially disturbing is just how random it all was. The Tunguska event didn't come with a warning. No radar system, no satellite detection, just a fireball, a boom, and an entire forest leveled like a game board reset. If the object had arrived just a few hours later, it could have hit St. Petersburg, Moscow, or even parts of Europe. And then this chapter wouldn't be about a strange cosmic event, it'd be about one of the worst disasters in human history. And here's the fun part. This could happen again. Earth is constantly bombarded by space rocks. Most are tiny and burn up in the atmosphere, but occasionally one gets big enough to punch through. In 2013, a smaller meteor only about 66 feet wide exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia, injuring over 10 people and damaging thousands of buildings. It didn't even hit the ground. And that was over a century after Tunguska. Same country, same sky, same reminder that we live under a very thin ceiling of safety. We like to think the sky is this calm, passive canvas. It's blue, sometimes cloudy, occasionally shows off with a rainbow or a thunderstorm. But every now and then, it reminds us that space is violent and indifferent. That above the weather and below the stars, there's a kind of chaos humming quietly, waiting for another opportunity to drop in fast, loud, and fiery. The Tunguska event wasn't just a one-off explosion in a remote forest. It was a cosmic memo, a reminder that we're not as grounded as we think. That above our heads, out beyond the jet streams and the satellites, the universe is still throwing rocks like a kid at recess. And sometimes those rocks hit, or don't. But either way, the sky never really promised us safety. It just holds its breath and waits. You wake up, stumble to the window, pull open the curtain, and outside, it's raining blood. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. Just straight up red liquid falling from the sky, pooling in gutters, streaking down windows, and soaking into the earth like the opening scene of a low-budget apocalypse movie. You'd probably think, is this it? Is the sky mad at me personally? Blood rain is one of those rare phenomena that turns nature into a horror movie. It's real. It's been reported for centuries, and it has terrified nearly every civilization that's seen it. Spoiler, it's usually not actual blood. But when the sky opens up and starts crying crimson, rational explanations tend to arrive late to the party if at all. Let's start in ancient times, because nothing says sky horror like 400 BC Greece. The philosopher Pliny the Elder wrote about rains that turned to blood and caused mass panic. Romans interpreted it as a sign of coming war or divine anger. Medieval Europeans took it a step further, calling it evidence of demonic activity, witchcraft, or worse harbingers of plague, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely inaccurate, given the track record of weird red sky stuff and subsequent disasters. The science behind blood rain, when it happens, is usually a bit less dramatic and a lot dustier. In many cases, the phenomenon occurs when strong winds pick up dust or sand from desert regions like the Sahara and carry it across vast distances. When those dusty particles mix with rain, they dye the water reddish or brownish, kind of like putting paprika in a water balloon. The result is a gory drizzle that looks straight out of a biblical plague, but is, in fact, just mud rain wearing a dramatic costume. Still, not all blood-colored rain is harmless. In 2001, the Indian state of Kerala experienced a series of blood-red rains that lasted for weeks. Samples were collected and tested. Initially, people believed it was caused by dust particles, But then the story got weirder. Researchers discovered strange, cell-like structures in the water particles that didn't match any known organism. Some suggested algae, others whispered alien spores. For years, conspiracy sites ran wild with theories about extraterrestrial microbes hitchhiking through Earth's upper atmosphere and turning India's monsoon into a horror show. Eventually, most scientists settled on a specific type of lichen-forming algae as the cause, but that didn't stop the headlines. Because mysterious alien rain just hits harder than regional spore bloom. And who can blame them? Blood rain is only the first act in the atmospheric horror anthology. The sky's theatrical streak doesn't stop at color, it also includes casting. And sometimes the sky casts frogs or fish. Yes, fish rain is real. No, it's not a marketing stunt for a new streaming platform. In places like Honduras, Japan, and even parts of the American South, people have reported fish literally falling from the sky alive, flopping, and deeply confused. The leading explanation is that waterspouts or tornadoes suck small aquatic animals up from bodies of water and then carry them inland, dropping them when the wind dies down or the storm disperses. It's basically extreme weather meets amateur seafood delivery. The town of Lloro in Honduras even has an annual event called Lluvia de Peces Fish Rainwear. Residents swear the phenomenon happens like clockwork, usually after heavy storms. No one's caught the fish falling in real time on camera, which adds to the spooky vibe. But they have plenty of photos of the aftermath. Hundreds of wriggling sardine-sized fish carpeting the ground, far from any ocean. Then there's meat rain. We wish we were kidding. In 1,876, chunks of meat reportedly fell from the sky over Bath County, Kentucky. People said it looked like beef. Some even tasted it. The 19th century, a simpler, grosser time. Scientists at the time guessed it was vulture vomites. That's a thing projectile regurgitated mid-flight. But even that didn't fully explain why the meat looked freshly sliced or why it was scattered over such a wide area. Honestly, this one's still unsettling. The sky should never be a butcher. Beyond biological precipitation, there's the horror of black rain seen most devastatingly after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This wasn't just weather being weird. This was the atmosphere soaking up radioactive soot and ash, mixing it with moisture, and unleashing it as inky, toxic rain. Survivors described it as thick, oily, and foul-smelling, and they were right to fear it. It carried radiation, disease, and a chilling reminder that sometimes it's not just nature playing tricks. Sometimes we do this to ourselves. Throughout history, skyfall events have been interpreted as omens, warnings, or punishments. And even today, when we have satellites, Doppler radar, and meteorologists on TikTok, something about the sky going off script still shakes us. We're used to clouds and rainbows, maybe the occasional hailstorm. But when the heavens start spitting frogs or painting the sidewalks red, that primal part of our brain flickers back on. The part that remembers campfire stories, ancient curses, and that one dream you had where the moon turned black and started leaking. We like to think the sky is above us, removed, separate. But every so often, it drops a reminder slippery, crimson, or fish-shaped, that it's still part of the same chaotic system we live in. We just don't get to see it bleed very often. And when we do, we remember. It started with one woman. She stepped into the street in Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire. Now just a charming French city with really good pastries, and she began to dance. No music, no festival, no visible reason. Just arms flailing, feet stomping, and eyes glazed over like she was locked in her own soundtrack. At first, the neighbors probably thought she was drunk or maybe possessed. But then she didn't stop. Not after a few minutes. Not after a few hours. Not even after a full day. She danced through the night. And then others joined her. Within a week, dozens of people, some accounts say as many as 400, were dancing in the streets. Not joyfully. Not like a flash mob. They weren't smiling. They weren't even really present. They danced until their feet bled, until their bodies gave out. Some dropped from exhaustion, others from heart attacks or strokes. No one could explain why, and no one could seem to stop. This was the dancing plague of 1518, a moment in history where the line between the body and the mind blurred completely, and where it looked for all the world like the sky itself had cast a curse of rhythm. Doctors were baffled. Remember, this was the early 16th century, so medicine mostly meant leeches and guesswork. Some physicians suggested that the dancers had overheated blood, a theory that led to perhaps the worst medical advice ever. Let them keep dancing. They believed the humors would balance out if the afflicted just danced through it. So local authorities, instead of quarantining the group or bringing in herbalists, built a literal stage. They even hired musicians to accompany the dancers. Because if you're going to have a plague, you might as well give it a good beat. This didn't help. Unsurprisingly, giving exhausted people more reason to flail around in public only made things worse. More dancers joined. More people collapsed. Some reportedly died mid-spin. The music didn't soothe the sickness, it amplified it. So, what happened? Modern historians and scientists have suggested a few theories, none of which are fully satisfying. One popular hypothesis is mass hysteria, formerly known as mass psychogenic illness. The idea is that during times of intense stress, groups of people can develop physical symptoms, not from a virus, but from shared psychological distress. And in 1518, Strasbourg was a city under pressure. Famine, disease, and political unrest all hovered over the population like storm clouds. People were hungry, scared, and waiting for divine punishment. The world already felt like it was ending. Maybe dancing until death seemed like as good an option as any. Another theory, just as unsettling, involves ergot poisoning. Ergot is a type of mold that can grow on damp rye and produces effects similar to LSD. Hallucinations, spasms, convulsions, paranoids, all on the menu. And in a time before preservatives, it's plausible that entire batches of grain were contaminated. If that's true, the dancing plague might have been the worst acid trip in European history. Still, the ergot theory has its issues. Ergot poisoning usually affects people in waves, not in synchronized choreography. It's more about trembling in bed than pirouetting into a fatal collapse. And it doesn't explain why people danced for days, nor why some seemed completely lucid in between bouts. Also, no one at the time reported the kind of full-body hallucinations that usually come with it. There were no flying dragons or melting cobblestones, just tired, terrified people who couldn't stop moving. Then there's the religious angle. Many believe the dancers were cursed by Saint Vitus, the patron saint of epilepsy, and you guessed it, dancing. In medieval lore, angering certain saints could result in divine punishment. And if you were feeling guilty, anxious, or just especially devout, it might not take much suggestion to believe you were being judged. Some dancers were eventually taken to shrines for exorcisms or blessings, and after praying and resting, a few actually recovered. Placebo? Faith? Exhaustion finally catching up? Hard to say. What we do know is that it wasn't a one-time thing. Similar outbreaks occurred elsewhere in Europe during the late Middle Ages. Germany, the Netherlands, and even Switzerland had their own moments of involuntary boogie fever. None reached the scale of Strasbourg, but the theme was the same. People dancing without joy, sweating and crying, unable to stop. There's something deeply creepy about this kind of event, not because it's dramatic, but because it's intimate. These weren't supernatural monsters or distant plagues. This was the human body betraying itself in public, under pressure. People literally moved themselves to death, not in pursuit of pleasure, but because their brains short-circuited under stress. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder, if the right pressure hit society today, would we see something similar? Not dancing, maybe, but another kind of group unraveling. One that feels contagious even though no one's coughing. The dancing plague didn't end with a cure. It fizzled out. Eventually, people collapsed, recovered, or died. The music stopped. The stage was dismantled. And the city of Strasbourg tried to go back to normal, with a weird historical footnote buried under centuries of silence. But even now, the image lingers. A woman in a red dress, spinning on cobblestones. A crowd following, not because they want to, but because something invisible, something heavy and unseen, has taken over. A storm inside their minds. Or maybe something in the sky, laughing just out of reach. When Krakatoa erupted in August of 1883, it didn't just destroy an island, it shattered the sky. The explosion was one of the loudest sounds in recorded history, heard nearly 30 miles away. It triggered tsunamis, flattened coastlines, and killed tens of thousands of people. But what came after, what lingered long after the shock waves faded, was something stranger, something beautiful, something horrifying. The sky went off script. In the months that followed the eruption, the atmosphere turned into a surrealist painting. Sunsets didn't just glow, they burned. The skies became canvases for oranges so violent they looked radioactive, purples so deep they seemed stained with ink, and greens no one had seen outside of nightmares or absinthe bottles. The moon went blue, the sun turned red, and the world, collectively, started to freak out. At first, people thought it was an omen, because what else do you do when the heavens start looking like they've caught fire? Newspapers from around the globe reported on eerie sunsets, describing them as blood-drenched and unholy. In New York, evening skies were described as copper red with streaks of gold and black. In London, artists stared up slack, jawed at what looked like divine rage in watercolor. Some Victorians genuinely believed the end times had arrived. Preachers sermonized, poets panicked. Even the weather got weird. The ash and aerosols injected into the upper atmosphere by Krakatoa wrapped around the globe like a smoky blanket, distorting the light, scattering wavelengths, and muting reality. It was as if the eruption didn't just break the island, it cracked open the sky and let something unnatural bleed through. One of the most unsettling aspects of Krakatoa's afterglow was how far and long it reached. The eruption occurred in Indonesia, but the skies over Europe, the Americas, and Africa were affected for years. Years. That's how much material the volcano ejected, an estimated 45 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and pumice. Enough to paint the planet. There are paintings, famous ones, even that show this. Edvard Munch, who painted The Scream, later claimed he was inspired by the eerie red skies he witnessed in Norway during that time. Standing on a bridge, watching the sky bleed, he wrote that he felt a great unending scream pass through nature. So if you've ever looked at that painting and thought, man, this guy was really going through it, just remember, so was the sky. Science has since explained the phenomenon in calm, reasonable terms. Krakatoa pumped sulfur dioxide and volcanic ash high into the stratosphere. These particles scattered sunlight in strange ways, especially during sunrise and sunset. Red wavelengths stretched, blue ones bent. The moon appeared to glow indigo because the ash filtered out the warmer tones. Basic atmospheric optics mixed with global trauma. But understanding it doesn't make it less haunting, because it wasn't just a sky show, it was a filter applied to grief. The world was still reeling from the disaster itself, whole communities destroyed, coastlines wiped off maps, and the sound of the blast echoing like a phantom through history. Ships at sea were tossed like toys. Survivors were left deaf. And then, as if nature wanted to rub it in, the sun set in ways that made even stoic men weep. This was a planet-wide mood swing, a visual reminder that something massive had broken, and the universe had chosen to mourn with fireworks. And people noticed. George James Simons, a British meteorologist, received over 500 letters from across the globe, all describing these unnatural sunsets. Artists painted them. Scientists measured them. Sailors wrote about the way the sea turned wine-colored at dusk. Everyone agreed something had changed. The skies had stories to tell, and none of them were comforting. And just to drive home the horror movie aesthetic, Krakatoa didn't just explode once. It built up. The first explosion was bad. The second, worse. The third destroyed most of the island. And the fourth, on August 27th, was the one that unzipped the air itself. That final blast is estimated to have been 10,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The pressure wave from the explosion traveled around the world 7 times. Barometers recorded it in Boston, in Paris, in Cape Town. That's how loud Krakatoa was. It rang the earth like a bell. So yes, science can now say that the red sunsets and blue moons were the result of light scattering and sulfur aerosols. But at the time, all people knew was that their sky had turned alien. That familiar cycle of day into night had been rewritten in bruised neon. Even now, Krakatoa's legacy lingers. It became a symbol not just of natural fury, but of how beauty and devastation can collide in the atmosphere. The sky didn't fall, but it did wear grief. It wore it loud. It wore it hot pink. And just maybe, it laughed a little while doing it. You wake up one morning in the year 536 AD. Stretch. Look out the window of your thatch-roofed home, if you're lucky enough to have one, and immediately notice something's off. The sun is up, but it's wrong. It glows like a weak coin, pale and small, like someone smeared it with ash. The sky has that weird gray-yellow color that makes your stomach twist, like the calm before a bad decision. And the birds? They're quiet, too quiet. This wasn't a bad week, or even a bad season. This was the start of what historians now call the worst year to be alive. It wasn't just gloomy weather, it was a worldwide atmospheric event that kicked off a decade of chaos. Crops failed, empires staggered, famines broke the back of entire regions. The sky dimmed for 18 months, and no one at the time knew why. Ancient chroniclers wrote about it with the kind of panic that only comes from watching nature misbehave for too long. The Byzantine historian Procopius, who usually wrote about wars and emperors, just casually dropped into one of his histories that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon. He wasn't trying to be poetic. He meant it literally. For more than a year, daylight felt like twilight, and twilight felt like bedtime for the planet. Cassiodorus, a Roman official in Italy, described it even more bleakly. We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon. Imagine walking outside in the middle of the day and not casting a shadow. You'd probably assume something apocalyptic was happening. You'd be right. The weird part is that this wasn't just a regional problem. Chinese records noted similar dimness, failed harvests, and bizarre atmospheric conditions. Irish annals report a failure of bread across the land. In the Andes and Central America, ice cores suggest sudden drops in temperature. Something huge had happened, but for over 1,000 years, nobody knew what. It wasn't until the 1990s that scientists, like history detectives with better tools, began to piece it together. They analyzed ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica and found a layer of volcanic sulfate deposited right around, you guessed it, 536 AD. The culprit? Likely a massive volcanic eruption, or maybe even two, somewhere in the northern hemisphere. Possibly Iceland, possibly North America. The exact volcano is still debated, but the outcome was clear. Ash and sulfur blasted into the stratosphere, forming a veil around the Earth that reflected sunlight back into space. Nature's version of turning the dimmer switch all the way down. The result? Global cooling, like a lot of it. Some areas saw temperature drops of up to 2.5 degrees Celsius, about 4.5 degrees Celsius. Crops didn't ripen. Fruit trees didn't blossom. In China, snow reportedly fell in August. People wore winter clothes in summer. And as you might imagine, when food stops growing, civilization gets moody. The famines came next, like vultures waiting for the weather to finish its slow-motion punch. In Europe, the food shortages triggered waves of migration, internal strife, and economic collapse. In the Eastern Roman Empire, already stressed by wars and political drama, the dimming sky felt like divine punishment. The Sasanian Empire in Persia wasn't faring much better. And just when the world was starting to maybe adjust to its new, colder, gloomier reality, nature doubled down. In 541 AD, a few years after the mysterious cloud faded, the first recorded outbreak of bubonic plague erupted in Constantinople. Yes, that plague. The one that would go on to haunt Europe for centuries. It was like the earth had decided it didn't want roommates anymore. Taken together, the decade that began in 536 was like the tutorial level for how bad can history get. The climate shock, the famine, the plague, the chaos. It was a rolling disaster that would help trigger the collapse or weakening of several empires, destabilize entire regions, and rewrite the political map of Europe and Asia for centuries. And what's eerie is how it just started. One day the sun shone normally. The next, it was acting like it had a hangover. People didn't understand aerosols or volcanic particulates. They assumed it was punishment, divine wrath, a cosmic omen. And honestly, who could blame them? Even now, with all our science and satellites, we're still vulnerable to the same kind of event. Another massive eruption, think Yellowstone, or even just a large Icelandic volcano like Lakikuld, inject enough ash into the sky to darken it again, to bring back those gray, hushed days where the sun flickers like a dying light bulb and crops second-guess their career choices. So when historians call 536 AD the worst year to be alive, they're not being dramatic. It wasn't one single catastrophe, it was a cascade. A domino effect of cold, hunger, and despair, all kicked off by the sky deciding to go grayscale. You don't need a meteor or a war to feel like the world's ending. Sometimes all it takes is for the sun to stop shining like it used to. And when that happens, it's not just crops and economies that suffer. It's faith, hope, the simple trust that tomorrow will be better, brighter, warmer. In 536, the answer to that was, not today, maybe not for years. The morning of February 15, 2013, started like any other in the Russian city of Chelyabinsk. It was cold, because it's always cold in February in that part of the world. People were getting ready for work, heating up their tea, packing lunches, navigating icy sidewalks, and generally not expecting the sky to throw a tantrum. But at 9:20 a.m., the universe decided to make an entrance. First, a light appeared in the sky bright enough to cast shadows, more dazzling than the sun, and moving fast. It wasn't just a streak. It was a flashbang, a cosmic headlight punching through the atmosphere at over 40 miles per hour. People looked up, squinted, grabbed their phones, dash cams, because Russia is the unofficial dashcam capital of Earth caught every second of it. A flaming ball tearing across the sky, white-hot and blinding. For a moment, it felt like the world had paused to stare. Then came the boom. Actually, not one boom, multiple. A delayed series of sonic cracks that shattered windows in 7 cities, knocked people off their feet, and triggered every car alarm in Chelyabinsk. The shock wave, traveling much slower than the light, finally caught up to the confusion and punched the city in the face. Over 500 people were injured, mostly from flying glass. Schools were evacuated, buildings were damaged, and still no one knew what had just happened. Was it a plane crash? A missile? Something worse? For a few dizzying hours, the internet did its thing. Theories flew, panic brewed, but pretty quickly, the science stepped in and confirmed what the sky had just dropped. A meteor. A chunk of rock about 66 feet wide, weighing roughly 13 tons, had entered Earth's atmosphere and detonated over a major city. Not a direct impact, thankfully, but an airburst, the same type of explosion that flattened Siberian forest in the 1908 Tunguska event. Just smaller, closer, and recorded from 10,000 angles. The meteor exploded about 18 miles above the ground, with the force of approximately 400 and 7,500 kilotons of TNT. That's 30 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. It blew out doors, cracked walls, and left a smoking trail in the sky that looked like a god had dragged a paintbrush across the atmosphere. And here's the part that really gets under the skin. We didn't see it coming. No telescopes caught it in advance. No warning system buzzed. The meteor came from the direction of the sun, where our telescopes are basically blind. It arrived quietly, invisibly, until it was suddenly very loud and very real. Earth, that day, had a near miss, not in the miss the planet sense, but in the thankfully exploded before it could punch a hole in the city sense. Fragments of the meteor did survive the explosion and rained down in small chunks across the region. The largest piece, over 400 pounds, was eventually pulled from the bottom of a frozen lake. It now sits in a museum, a quiet gray rock that once knocked an entire city sideways. Scientists, of course, were thrilled, not about the injuries or the property damage, but because this was the most well-documented meteor event in modern history. Thousands of videos, tons of eyewitness accounts, a real-time case study in what happens when space decides to get personal. But for the rest of us, it was a sobering reminder. We like to think of space as far away, distant, calm, something you look at through a telescope or admire in a planetarium. But the truth is, we live in a cosmic shooting gallery. Earth is constantly bombarded by bits of rock and ice. Most burn up in the atmosphere without incident. Some survive. A few like this detonate with enough force to break stuff. And the scariest part? Chelyabinsk wasn't even a big one. If that rock had been just a little larger, or hit at a slightly different angle, the damage could have been catastrophic. The city was lucky. The explosion happened high enough in the atmosphere to spare it the worst, but it also exposed just how unprepared we are for a space rock with a different attitude. The Chelyabinsk event triggered a flurry of global discussion about planetary defense. Suddenly, things like asteroid tracking and deflection weren't just sci-fi plotlines, they were policy goals. NASA, ESA, and other space agencies started pushing harder for funding to detect potentially hazardous near-Earth objects. Think Bruce Willis in Armageddon, but with more spreadsheets. Meanwhile, Chelyabinsk quietly rebuilt. People replaced their windows. Teachers explained meteors to wide-eyed kids who now had dashcam footage of their own sky apocalypse. And some probably kept one nervous eye on the horizon, just in case the sky had more opinions to share. Because that's the truth of it. The sky doesn't care what day it is. It doesn't care if you have a dentist appointment or a birthday party. It doesn't ask permission before dropping flaming reminders that we live on a fragile rock floating through a debris field of ancient cosmic leftovers. The 2013 Chelyabinsk meteor wasn't the end of the world, but it could have been. Or at least, it was close enough to make us feel the edge of what that would look like. A silent rock, a flash in the sky, a boom that rattles bone sand, a very loud message from above. You are small, the universe is large, and sometimes breakfast is interrupted by fire. Imagine standing in a snowy field in 1859. You've just finished a long day of hauling hay, tending to livestock, or sharpening bayonets depending on your station in life, and you're looking forward to the kind of quiet only the 19th century could offer. Then, just as you're about to douse the lantern, the night sky explodes, not with fire or thunder, but with light. Curtains of shimmering green and red ripple above your head, undulating across the stars like God's ghost waving goodbye. You drop your lantern, you mutter a prayer, because you've never seen anything like this, and neither has anyone else around you. You don't have Instagram filters, scientific explanations, or satellite weather apps. You just have raw, unfiltered fear and the superstitions passed down from every nervous grandparent before you. And this looks like an omen. The northern lights are aurora borealis. If you're feeling fancier, one of the most beautiful natural phenomena the sky has to offer. Today, we admire them from Icelandic spas, Canadian tundras, and TikTok reels set to chill synth music. But centuries ago, these same glowing waves in the sky weren't just beautiful, they were terrifying. Because they were unexpected and unexplained, and in many cases, incredibly well-timed with disaster. Take the Carrington event of 1859, the biggest solar storm in recorded history. On September 1, British astronomer Richard Carrington was in his observatory when he spotted something weird, a burst of light from the sun like a solar sneeze. He didn't know it yet, but that was a solar flare, huge, angry explosion hurling charged particles toward Earth at high speed. And when those particles hit our magnetic field, they set off a geomagnetic tantrum that lit up the night sky with auroras brighter than any on record. The northern lights were suddenly visible as far south as the Caribbean. People in Cuba saw the sky glowing red and thought the world was ending. In the northeastern United States, miners woke up in the middle of the night and started making breakfast. Because the sky was so bright, they thought it was morning. Telegraph systems sparked, caught fire, and sent messages even when unplugged. The electromagnetic chaos made 19th century tech look possessed. In Europe, the lights were visible from Rome to Paris to Madrid. Red, green, purplet looked like the heavens were bleeding. Religious leaders took to pulpits to warn of Judgment Day. Farmers worried about blight. Soldiers panicked, thinking the lights were battle signals or divine warnings. Basically, it was a vibe, but not a peaceful one. And that wasn't the only time auroras ruined someone's sleep. During the American Civil War, in December of 1864, The Northern Lights lit up the night after the Battle of Fredericksburg. Soldiers on both sides reported eerie glows overhead blood-red skies that pulsed with silent menace. Some Union soldiers took it as a sign that God disapproved of the war. Others assumed the Confederacy had conjured something terrible. The heavens felt like they were screaming. And in the silence that followed the gunfire, the lights made everything feel like a stage set for something worse. But the fear of auroras isn't limited to just war zones and solar storms. Across history, cultures all over the world have assigned meaning, often grim to these strange sky flickers. The Inuit believed the aurora was the spirits of the dead playing ball with a walrus skull. In medieval Europe, red auroras were seen as omens of plague or war. In China, they were often interpreted as dragons battling in the sky. And in many indigenous North American cultures, the lights were treated with reverence and fear, something sacred, but not to be trifled with. Even in more recent memory, auroras have made people nervous. During the Cold War, with nuclear fears dialed up to 11, sky watchers on both sides of the Iron Curtain kept a close eye on anything strange. In January 1938, a particularly strong aurora display was seen across Europe. It was so bright and blood-red that fire departments were called out en masse to put out what people assumed were massive blazes in the distance. Days later, Hitler invaded Austria. Many believed the lights were a supernatural warning, or perhaps just bad timing. So why do these lights look so terrifying sometimes? It comes down to color, scale, and silence. The aurora is made when charged particles from the sun hit Earth's magnetic field, collide with gas molecules in our atmosphere, and release energy as light. The color depends on the type of gas and altitude. Green from oxygen about 60 miles up, red from oxygen at higher altitudes, and purple or blue from nitrogen. That means a good aurora display can fill the entire sky with glowing sheets of shifting color like fire, but cold and silent. When you don't expect that, when you have no way to explain it, it's less, ooh, pretty, and more, what did I do wrong? The truth is, we still don't fully understand the long-term effects of geomagnetic storms, especially in our tech-soaked world. A Carrington-level event today could fry satellites, cripple power grids, and basically make your smartphone a shiny paperweight. But even if that never happens again, the Northern Lights will keep dancing. Quiet, cosmic, unpredictable. So next time you see glowing curtains in the sky, remember this: not everyone found them so comforting. To some, they were a prophecy. To others, a celestial warning. And to a few unlucky 19th century telegraph operators, they were a literal shock to the system. You're standing in your kitchen, pouring coffee, when it begins a low, metallic groan that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It rattles the window pane and echoes in your chest. You look out at the empty street, at the calm sky, and yet it continues. A noise like a rusty ship grinding through the clouds. No thunder, no aircraft, just sound, loud and low and wrong. You ask your neighbor, they heard it too. You check the news, nothing official. You check the internet. So it's happening everywhere. They call them sky trumpets, or the hum, or apocalyptic horns, and they've been recorded around the world. Canada, Ukraine, Chile, Germany, the U.S., Philippines. One day in Florida, another in Siberia. It happens in cities, suburbs, forests, even out in the middle of nowhere. These eerie sounds, sometimes mechanical, sometimes orchestral, always deeply unsettling, emerge from the silence and vanish without explanation. Some people describe it as a metallic wail. Others say it sounds like an ancient door groaning open, A few say it feels almost musical, like a trumpet trying to signal something no one knows how to interpret. Most agree it feels unnatural, and that's the part that sticks with you. Because when the sky makes a noise it shouldn't, when it stops being just background and starts performing a haunting solo, you start asking questions. Recordings flood YouTube and Reddit. Some are hoaxes, sure clever audio tricks layered onto video, but not all. There are hundreds of credible, verified clips, filmed by people with no apparent reason to lie. Groups of neighbors standing in their driveways staring up, children covering their ears, dogs pacing and whining, even birds going dead silent. The sky, it seems, knows how to get attention. The first wave of global interest kicked off around 2011, when reports of these sounds began spiking across continents. Kyiv, Ukraine, became one of the earliest viral epicenters. Residents were jolted awake by a deep droning sound that reverberated through buildings. Videos captured the event. No clear source, no planes in sight, no earthquakes reported. Just that noise. A sound no one could place, but everyone felt. Some theorized it was geological tectonic plates shifting under stress, the earth groaning from within. Others blamed atmospheric pressure systems or magnetic storms, likening it to the way a wind instrument plays when air is forced through a narrow channel. Military experiments, secret tunnels, alien messaging systems, these all got tossed into the conspiracy basket too, as did biblical interpretations. The trumpet of revelation, the last alarm before the end of everything. You know, subtle stuff. Science has weighed in, of course. There are plausible explanations, kind of. Some meteorologists suggest the sounds might result from skyquakes, rare atmospheric disturbances caused by sudden temperature inversions, distant thunder bouncing weirdly, or sonic booms from aircraft. Some geologists point to brontides, a term used to describe unexplained rumbling sounds believed to be caused by seismic activity too deep to register as a quake. Others think infrasound, the kind of ultra-low frequency noise you can't hear but still feel, could play a role, especially when funneled through unusual terrain. But here's the thing. None of those explanations account for every incident. The locations vary too wildly. The sounds differ too much. And they don't always correspond to geological or atmospheric events. Sometimes it's cloudy. Sometimes it's clear. Sometimes the sound is isolated to a neighborhood. Sometimes it's citywide. Sometimes multiple cities reported on the same day. The pattern isn't a pattern, and that, more than anything, is what creeps people out. Take the Windsor hum in Ontario, Canada, a low-frequency noise that plagued residents for years. It came and went, sometimes lasting days, sometimes only hours. People complained of headaches, insomnia, anxiety. It was eventually traced to industrial activity on nearby Zug Island. But even with that knowledge, the exact mechanism remained fuzzy. The hum would stop for weeks, then return, like it had a personality. Then there's Taos, New Mexico, where a persistent hum has been reported since the 1990s. Some people hear it, others don't. Tests have been run, maps drawn, sound frequencies charted, but still no consensus. It became part of the town's identity, a mystery with a zip code. The hum that followed people home but couldn't be recorded properly. It's unsettling to be haunted by something no one else believes is real. And we haven't even gotten to the sounds that seem to be coming from the sky itself. Those echoing trumpet-like blasts heard in countries as diverse as Sweden and Costa Rica. Some of them last minutes. Some come in short, sharp bursts. In 2015, a woman in British Columbia recorded a sound so intense, so eerie, that even the trees seemed to flinch. It echoed off the hills. Her dogs hid. And then it stopped. No aircraft, no explosion, no power grid issue, just a sound. Then silence. The human brain isn't built for unexplained noise. We want origins, logic, decibel levels. When we hear thunder, we picture clouds colliding. When we hear a car alarm, we think motion sensor. But when we hear the sky moan like a dying robot or scream like a ghost with stage fright, we don't know where to file that. It touches something primal, a fear that's less about danger and more about confusion. The universe doing something weird and not offering a single line of explanation. So maybe it's tectonic, maybe it's air pressure, maybe it's machinery echoing across landscapes in bizarre ways. Or maybe, just maybe, the sky has opinions. Maybe the planet is muttering to itself. Or maybe, if you want to go full Twilight Zone-ites us, a signal, long delayed, bouncing back. A sonic breadcrumb from a future we don't understand yet. Or a warning we slept through the first time. Whatever the case, one thing is certain. When the sky starts talking, people listen. They run outside. They record, they share, they panic, laugh, speculate, and listen again. Because while the sky may not be falling, every once in a while it screams just loud enough to remind us it's still up there, watching, and occasionally making some very unsettling noise.